Since the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003, the country hasn't stopped making headlines. Though many media outlets are stationed in the country, safety concerns make it difficult for reporters to travel freely. Critics say this often limits the kinds of stories we hear. Amy Ball is one of those critics. Having worked in the media herself, she was skeptical about some of the news coverage she saw. That is until a friend returned from an envoy in Iraq.
So my friend went in September and came back with amazing stories and footage that really told a different story than my experience. I was really struck by the human side in a fledgling democracy really trying to get it right.
When the opportunity came to go to Iraq, she jumped at the chance. And though she'd planned on going with a group, she wound up going alone. She flew to the capital city of Erbil in the northern region of Iraq known as Kurdistan or Iraqi Kurdistan, but admits she had her own preconceptions.
I think I brought 12 headscarves. I was stalked, and I didn't wear one once. I was never asked to. I felt comfortable not wearing one. There's a section in Erbil that's Christian. It's called Antwi. On the street in Antwi would be like on the street in any other community. There were open markets, people wandering freely.
Ball also expected to see the devastation of war once there, but saw something quite different.
In Erbil, you don't see that. What you see is the rubble is from buildings that needed to be demolished. It's not war-scarred. Now, when I went into the community of Barzan, which is northern Iraq, northern Kurdistan, that village had been leveled 17 times since 1940, so it was brand spanking new.
She was amazed at what she saw, and so with camera in hand, she filmed the documentary, Beyond Baghdad, What the Media Won't Tell You About Iraq.
When somebody says elections are free and open in a country that used to be very totalitarian, I like to know that that's true. I was suspicious. I found them very free, very open, very committed. There is a commitment to democracy there that we, even in Canada, have forgotten to appreciate. There's 87-year-old women voting for the first time in their lives, or second time, bringing 20 of their family with them.
But some of her disbeliefs of the media coverage were confirmed. For one thing, says Ball, the perception that all of Iraq is dangerous is wrong.
Erbil, which is in the province of Kurdistan, which is the capital of Kurdistan, is very safe. And that's the part that I knew was over-exaggerated in the media. But I couldn't speak from personal experience, so I went there to see for myself.
The region, now known as Iraqi Kurdistan, sits on the northern part of Iraq, northwest part of Iran, southeastern part of Turkey, and the northern part of Syria. And while today it may be safe, the Kurdish people have had a long and troubled history, says Dr. Othman Ali, a professor of Middle Eastern history who teaches at the University of Toronto.
The Medes were the ancestors of the Kurds, and they have lived there for at least 3,000 years in a historic area, which is we call now Kurdistan.
According to Dr. Ali, the European notion of ethnic nationalism came to the Middle East during World War I, which led to conflict between Iraqi Arabs and Kurds.
So the British tried to accommodate the Kurdish nationalist aspiration by giving them some kind of cultural autonomy. But with the departure of the British, the Arab nationalists have a very centralist and what you call it, chauvinistic Arab nationalism. They tried to stamp out every aspect of Kurdish nationalism with all means. So there was really a cultural genocide started against the Kurd. This cultural genocide was accompanied with violence.
Later, under Saddam Hussein, the Kurds were victims of intense and systematic persecution, he says.
Saddam tried to end the Kurdish question with one policy, and that is the policy of annihilation of the Kurds. His solution was what Hitler had for the Jews, the final solution, and therefore he began the white campaign of using of chemical weapons. And also in 1987, he started a campaign known as Anfal, where at least 300,000 Kurds were picked from their villages, mostly children and women, were picked and taken to southern part Iraq. Up until now, they are not accounted for. And occasionally, after the fall of Iraqi regime, Saddam's regime, they are finding few mass graves up until now.
And while there are still some problems, like allegations of government corruption, the Kurdish people are rebuilding, says Dr. Ali, using a political voice they've never had before in Iraq.
Well, there is a very flourishing democracy. Economic prosperity is certainly, compared to the rest of Iraq, you can see a very tangible economic development in the area. In September last year, I was in Kurdistan. I saw many Arab merchants, entrepreneurs who have left Baghdad. Many leading professionals, like physicians, top physicians, who are Arabs. Now they have migrated to the Kurdish area because it is peaceful, it is stable, it is safe.
And the Kurds' ability to move forward has helped her rediscover her faith, says Ball, who was raised Catholic.
My perception of the Middle East has always been of people who harbor hatred towards one another, which is what we continue to keep fighting over. The Kurdish people dispelled all of those myths.
Unforgiveness is something Ball herself has struggled with since she was a teenager. After a chaplain took advantage of her friend in high school, she says her faith was shaken.
I was disappointed at how the school community handled that. I was disappointed. I was disappointed in the fact that the church didn't take a stronger role in the situation that occurred.
And that lack of acknowledgement, she says, drove her further away from the church.
When you keep things quiet, nobody moves forward. Everybody just buries it and tries to pretend, and it affects your faith. I had a lot of fights with my mother, who I couldn't, she just couldn't understand how I couldn't forgive and move forward. But for me to forgive required somebody to admit that something had gone on. So we were back in that chicken and the egg.
But as she documented the progress of Iraq, a meeting with a man whose father had been murdered by Saddam Hussein taught her about true forgiveness.
And I said to him, you know, I'm very sorry for what happened to you. And just in a moment, you could see the grief flash. And then he said, yes, thank you. And then he just moved forward. We just want peace. And I thought, if there's anybody in this world who had a right to want vengeance, to want retaliation, to want somebody's head on a platter for what has happened to him and his village and his family, it would be that man. And he was not like that at all.
Though the Kurdish people are rebuilding, they need partners, Ball says. Hoping Canadians could lend a hand, she started the Friends of Kurdistan Foundation 5 days into her trip.
We're working on doing some clinics, some women's clinics in the rural areas. There is an extremely high incidence of breast cancer in Kurdistan because their education of that issue has not kept pace with the reality. We'd like to bring sewing machines and fabric to help them start a microcredit program so that they can help themselves move forward.
Ball wants to stress that the Kurds aren't looking for money or handouts. The resources they want, she says, are human.
The president of the university asked for teachers to teach their teachers, to develop their people. If you're a teacher on sabbatical, or you're retired, teacher or retired nurse, they could sure use you in there for a year. Year of your time would have a lifetime impact in their communities. Computer scientists, archaeologists, they need that intellectual support, whatever you could do.
Despite everything she experienced, Ball admits she still struggles to forgive.
Once you commit to that forgiveness, you have to let go, and you have to move on, and you have to turn that page.
Do you think you've been able to do that?
I think that's a time thing. I think I've got to re-engage myself in the community that I was raised in on a different level now. I don't think I can get by on the outskirts.
And by engaging with the Kurdish people and Christian Iraqis in the Iraqi town of Ankawa, she hopes to one day let go of the past.
Well, you know, I can't just show up every Sunday or every other Sunday and consider myself a participant. I think you have to give back. I've already been accused on emails being a do-gooder. We don't need any Western do-gooders. I don't really perceive it as that. I perceive it as helping where you can. It just happens to be quite a ways away.
Earlier this year, Ball returned to Kurdistan to start work on the Women's Clinic and Microcredit Program. And though it will be a challenge, she's committed to showing the Kurdish people that Canadians can deliver. To find out more about the Friends of Kurdistan Foundation, visit crossroads.ca and click on guest information. In Toronto, Ontario, I'm Bridget Antwi for 100 Huntley Street.